if you look at the plan side, obviously claims and eligibility data and lots of other different data types that we're dealing with. And then when you think about the consumer, it kind of starts to get back to what I was speaking about earlier, and then add in pharmacy, right? So there's a lot of disparate sources of data that are really coming together in order for us to create a coordinated experience and really create a high quality of care. But it presents a significant challenge. And so, as we think about this, it can become really difficult for us to drive healthcare forward because we have all of these challenges. When you add to that the complexity of privacy and security and the fact that we have a shortage of humans to actually support coordinating this care, it becomes really clear that automation and AI are really critical tools in helping us to move forward and advance. So when you consider some of these challenges, how is IBC thinking about the use of AI and automation to alleviate the pressure to reduce costs while maintaining a high level of quality care?
Yeah.
So Stan, we'll start with you.
Thank you, April. If anybody's been part of a branding, we go by IBX now, and I got to keep reminding myself that. So, but IBX is actually good, and then that's
Thank
me.
You
yeah,
for
just
saying that. Yes.
But yeah, IBX. We actually went on when AI kind of became mainstream, and everybody was playing with ChatGPT and turning their performance reviews into Metallica songs or something. Rather, we're just all having fun with it. I think the organization as a whole took a pretty proactive approach and said, hey, we need to figure out how can we use AI. And at the end of the fourth quarter of last year, we did a kind of an AI brainstorm saying, hey, now that we know it's the genie is out of the bottle, let's figure out what can we be doing. And so we worked across the full organization to see what could we use now that you've seen it and you've played with it a little bit to see what this generative AI features or function can do. And so we brainstormed about 58 different ideas that really categorized around 16 primary topics. And I think if you went around the room, I think we would all come up with approximately the same thing if you're working in the health payer space. But just to kind of name a few, and I'll hit a few of these later on as we go a little deeper into the conversation. But claims analysis, appeals management, communication, a lot around customer service, and you get the folks in the case management area were talking about how they could use it in disease management. So really, you might as well just throw a dartboard up and start throwing things at. If you have data, which we have plenty of, and I think we'll talk about the compliance components as well. You really have to ask yourself, so how can I then access this information and make it more intelligible for either what we're doing internally or outwardly facing for our members. So that's kind of the initial approach, is really kind of see what we can do, and then and we'll talk a little bit later, what are we actually focused on.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, no, and to sort of dovetail off of that, a couple things Dr. Castro said there at the end was, learn more about AI. What is generative AI versus, you think about traditional AI with machine learning, or even bots were big a few years ago. But now with generative AI, just learning about what the concept of it was for that ideation session really brought out some different ideas. And, and they're wide ranging, and, it was almost like, let's boil the ocean because it's so powerful, it can do all these new things. But when you really take a step back and look at it, what we're talking about is language and words and pictures and visuals. And so, in our industry, there's obviously call center is a big thing, and that's where spoken language comes in. And there's been a ton of work done on automated attendance. And so when you looked at where should we go, where should we spend money, it's an obvious answer. And if you even look broader across all industries, you got companies like Salesforce out there that are touting like out of the box agent force that can already answer all these questions as an automated attendant. But with healthcare, I think we have to be more pragmatic because of the regulation, because of the compliance, but also, as we'll talk further, it's a little bit more about all of the data and information required to answer a member's question or a provider's question, right? And if that data and information is not accurate, then you get bad answers. And we rely on our call center staff to access all these different applications to while live with a member asking you that question on the spot. How do they do that? And this is where the thought was, well, let's use the generative AI to come back for the call center agents with better answers to talk to the customer with, to talk to the member with. And I think, you think about taking a step back from full automation and letting go to having the information displayed, and you think about how using natural language processing, information displayed back to the agent that they can readily respond back to the customer with was the first use cases that were drawn out. And I think, that's where, and again, we'll talk about the complexities of some of the data as we move through the session here, but if you think about that as a starting point, it really was, the focus on generative AI and how can we use it started there with the call center.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, so when we think about AI, right, it's a really broad term. We heard some of this yesterday in the office, the concept of AI and is machine learning a form of AI. And the reality is that some of this technology has been around since the 80s. It's not really new, it's just new to us. And how we use it and taking the pragmatic approach and understanding where we need, a human intervention and getting the value of human plus AI. I think, again, Dr. Castro was spot on with regard to his comments there. But as we think about that, what are some of the back office functions that you guys are thinking can benefit the most from AI and automation?
I'll take a run at it.
What's that?
I'll take a run at it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So again, from the list that we had gotten into, specifically to, specific functions as we think about back office, one that came to mind that was pretty high on the list, and if anybody works in an appeals and grievance area and you have to produce letters, I think that's a pain point. I would probably tell people to raise their hand and see how many people have reevaluated their letters and to make sure that they're proper and that they're being used appropriately. And then in free-form text, you have to make sure that they meet the criteria for fifth grade. I don't know if it's fifth or third grade now at this point, but that's a great opportunity in this space. It's actually a simple application. I actually did it for my daughter, where I took some of her writing that was too long and had ChatGPT condense it for a submission. Don't tell her teacher, but it does work. So that's a simple back office function, right? It's a whole team that's dedicated to responding back to the members, and I think there's an opportunity. A lot of it's templated language, so that stays straightforward, but it's that free-form text opportunity where if you feed the information, that information can be presented in a consumable way by the member. A couple other areas, of course, if you're not already doing it, but I always called it speech analytics. It's called NLP. You have small language models, large language models. That world is just continuing to evolve, and from my perspective, it just enhances the customer service area. I argue that it's the simple things that will help us get us there. I asked my teams very simple questions. Just what did people call about yesterday? What did they call about last week? What did they call about this month? And you can start from there as to what you're going to do. And there's a lot of intelligence just built into our unstructured data that we can take advantage of a lot of these models on. And I have a plethora of other items like the member journey, just kind of mapping that out, making it more intuitive to know. We do a lot of research. Well, I can have an agent spend easily 45 minutes doing a full member journey, but AI can probably pull it together so long as the data has been connected to be able to pull that kind of information together.
You go.
I have so many more.
Well, yeah, no, I will. And let me expand on that a bit more. So, my career has been spent in the back office, BPO, BPAS. So we're talking about how do we apply AI to things like claims processing or COB, payment integrity, enrollment, billing, all of the transactional work that goes on the payer side or even on the RCM side. And when you look at that, some of these advancements are things that will take us from benchmarks we know today, like in claims processing, and you think about setting up your benefits configurations and all your pricing and all that, and going from 90% auto adjudication rates. It's entirely possible that you could have 100% auto adjudication out of having the faster processing with the better techniques, predictive or otherwise, such that everything is automated, and you could literally, then you're in the position of how did it score, and let's look at the outcome. Rather than have processors do the work, you're looking at your organization transforming to let me inspect the outcomes of what the automation did for us to validate that it's correct. And those kind of advancements, if you think about all the different areas that have to come together to just pay a claim. The docs do a great service, and now the claim comes over and you're checking eligibility, you're checking, all the product details, you're checking, how should we pay that, what are the contracts? All of that data has to be in sync and looked at properly. The advancements in the technology, the speed which we can process, and the availability of the data, and coupled with the predictive modeling, will just move those automation levels higher, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, for sure. So with all of this, I sort of started the conversation talking about challenges. What are some of the challenges that you face, that you see some of your peers facing as it relates to trying to implement AI and automation in healthcare in general, but certainly in your own organizations?
I'm going to roll. I think, when you're looking at introducing new technology or new processes, and as I look across the room here, like I'm an ops guy. I bet you most of the folks in the room, you're back office ops people. That's why you're here. You're doing claims. You're doing processing. You might oversee call centers. The integration of the various piece parts of an ecosystem, like in the BPaaS world, they'll call it an ecosystem. All these different great applications that you pull together from platforms. I think where you see challenges, in my opinion, and even organizations like you got RCM, but then you got the health plan, but within the health plan you're interacting with the PBMs and whatnot, all to make sure everything comes together. The challenge is going to be not every part of the ecosystem is going to keep up to speed, and that's where a lot of these synchronization or data issues might come to play. A different thought I had about challenges that will hit the back office relative to AI. If you think about your organizations today and the kind of work that the people in your organizations do, and even whether it's a source partner or internal, you'll have a larger group of people that are doing transaction processing, right? The game will change as you introduce the automation. And there's examples of the transformation you will likely need to go through where your staff will need to have more specialization and be more focused on the outcomes. And it might be reduced staff. And think about this, like for those who, if anybody's gone through the journey of outsourcing a large group of processors, you go through the same process. You're moving that functional work out to another organization, but what happens back at the ranch? You're still responsible for the outcome. So you increase your staff to have more subject matter experts working in that transformation, which got you the savings. With AI, it's going to be the same thing, or these advanced automations will present the same thing. We're going to go from people transacting in an application to do that, to make that transaction whole. Like, simple example, let me process the claim, let me update a member address. Being done serially by a bunch of processors. Tomorrow, the automation could drive those transactions. And again, I come back to the staff that will be working on this will need to do those validations. They'll need to know the business outcomes of what the automation drives. So you're going to have larger teams of experts who are going to need to ensure that the work is done accurately by the automation.
Love it. Just thinking about current state with what we're using and trying to implement, I think adoption is probably on the top of the list in terms of some of the challenges. I think it's new technology. It's not everybody understands it. I think we all have a baseline understanding of it. But if you watch and see I forgot who shared it the other day, the forest and the tree statistical modeling. There's a lot of complicated math that's actually happening behind the scenes to get it to all to work. I'm actually guilty of not being a good adopter. We're using Copilot. And so the fact of the matter is I might be very knowledgeable in it, but I'm still hesitant to actually engage in it. And I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges as we kind of face it. I think to your point, though, about the workforce, that's part of it, right? The workforce is going to have to adapt and change, and they may feel like, we don't know how people are feeling. Is this replacing my job? I don't know how many people have actually looked online to see if your job is one of the replaceables. I think everybody in the banking industry probably thought that they were. And so that's part of it. Like, how do you adapt and reassure people that that's not actually the case? I think we had a conversation last night about the future and the future for our kids and what it's actually going to look like. So I think that initial adoption and comfort is going to be critical. And I think it's I kind of have it later on in one of my answers, but it's like practicing. You just got to get in, do it, and put the reps in. And so you have you have this technology out there, and you got to get people used to using it.
Well, and think about this, the natural language part of it. The answers for people working in the desk today now can come out in a format that's easier for them to understand and take action with. And so where you have like deeper analytics that are doing pattern recognition, the natural language processing part of it can actually deliver back easier to understand for the analyst what the outcomes are, and can ask those second and third level questions and have them answered by the AI so that they can take action. So because think about the way analytics works today. Like, you take any example, we'll switch to provider data. Hey, we're seeing all these, my provider data needs cleansing. So you go through a process to do that. But then where do you take action and whatnot? The outputs can be more in a form that's easier for the people, the staff that's going to make the change, easier for them to take action. And, actually I'm thinking of, you did a lot of work on a similar topic, a lot of claims patterning, but the outputs, I don't know if you want to talk about that, the way the outputs looked and the second and third sort of questions that were answered in that you were able to take out to operations.
I will talk about that.
Okay.
So actually, I want to tag on to this a little bit because I think the point, at least that I'm gleaning from it, is so critical, which is the change management aspect of how we leverage this technology to create the best possible outcome, right? Let's just be real with each other here. I call healthcare and education the dinosaurs when it comes to technology, because it takes us, we got to talk about it for 5 years, and we got to think about it a little longer before we actually start doing things. And we spend all of this time thinking about members and communicating to members and really ensuring that we manage any change, right? Provider network changes, that's a huge ordeal, and we've got to think about how to do that. Or if we need to change a workflow, it's a huge ordeal, and we think about how to do it. But when it comes to this technology, it's moving so quickly that it's really hard, I think, in these organizations to help the teams come along and keep up with us. So I think that can be a really big challenge. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about both, how to manage through that change, given that there's some timing required, and sometimes it's longer than we'd like. And then the challenge of helping convey the value of what's coming, but not yet here, because the result is reliant on people coming along with the journey and taking kind of a test and learn approach. So I don't know if you have thoughts you might
All
share
right.
on this.
I'll take a shot at
Okay,
it.
okay.
Now, well, think of in large organizations, what I'm doing today in my job function, I've learned, and that's what I do. Change can be hard. That tomorrow I'm going to do it differently, or tomorrow it'll look a different way. And I'll go back to my call center days on this one. The ability to get 1,000 people to say the same answer and follow the DLPs is like herding cats. So now you're going to introduce better answers into teams. It can be done, and that's why I cite to me the parallel was if you've ever been on a journey to install a new platform, or if you've sourced a department, those type of transitions and change management aspects actually many times have surprisingly positive outcomes, because the people involved think, first reaction is my job's at risk. But then when they understand, and to your point, like it's introduced, phased in, the second feedback is, oh, this is so much better than what we were doing. And then there's a confidence in the technology and the reality, the realizations that the team is still owning the business process.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, the change management. I think it's a cliche now at this point. We've been working through change. I think
it's true.
But when specifically to this, when ChatGPT kind of came onto the scene, and I would argue, and again, the example you were talking about, to your point, AI and machine learning have been around for a long time. Actually, the chessboard is built off of probabilistic matching. Right. On how you can, how the computer actually wins. So it's been around for a long time, just being used on natural language. But the one thing I'd ask my team to do is say, hey, just download this frickin' thing and start using it. Start asking it questions. I think many job reviews were done using ChatGPT at some point, and job descriptions were written. I wish Farheen actually one of her job descriptions was totally written inside of the generative AI world. So Again, it's like anything. You just got to go in and use it. It took me. I was using the example last night about. I know it's not generative AI, but it was analog brakes. I grew up learning how to. Many of you are in Minnesota. I grew up in North Dakota and then lived in Minnesota for a little bit. I pumped my brakes, and so it was very hard for me to adapt to just, using that. Press your foot down all the way. Like that is totally counterintuitive. And in the same vein, we have a new technology that's still really unheard of. Like we don't even know like what is all capable to be done. I mean, you're talking big data that crosses boundaries. So, I guess the tip I said is just go ahead and put the brakes down if you have analog brakes, and just trust that the outcome will be okay on the other side if we're all thinking about it the way we should be in having these conversations.
Yeah, no, so that is a perfect segue. Thank you. So we think about putting the brakes on, crossing boundaries. I don't think we're totally clear yet just how much boundary crossing there could potentially be, which causes a little resistance. And that's why I think the testing is so important. But along those veins, what are some of the security and compliance related areas that you might share with the audience that you think we have to look out for, and how do we overcome that, or how are we thoughtful and careful about doing the experimentation that does get us further faster without violating some of those tenets?
All right, I'll give it another shot. Yeah, and we heard Dr. Castro mention this, Sashi mentioned this. From the regulatory bodies, and health insurance is obviously heavily regulated. We all know who the usual suspects are. The proliferation of more data into more areas, and you think about technology partners and where data goes and all the big models and what filtering can happen, is uncharted territory. So, there's already a great deal of scrutiny on PHI, PII, as we all live it, breathe it, we know about it every day. And I think what will become the challenge will be what is actually happening with that data. And let me convert the point into, for those who've ever been through an audit, CMS audit, a state insurance audit, whatever.
I'm sure no one here has had that.
No, it never happens. You look at how the regulators look at the business, and it's a little bit of show me, but the show me is based on old technology. A lot of times you have to prove what you've done because of the user interactions with screenshots or other things. I think now the show me has to elevate to prove where the data has been that got you to this answer. And also show me the algorithms that got you to this answer. Because as there's sort of two worlds here. It's like, hey, so envision this. In an audit, they're looking at a specific phone call and an answer is given around a member called up about, hey, I don't understand my EOB or what's my copay or, common things. And the AI generates the answer based on predictive scores and whatnot. Call center agent reads that out, or if it's automated. Now it's like, well, what was in the model for all the point in time data that drove that answer? Is, if I'm the regulators, I'm going to want to know, and it's going to beget the question of, well, where did that data sit and how is it protected? So I think in the future, as the more we use this level of automation, the more it's going to be what are the underlying data trails to show and demonstrate the logic that got you to the answer that for that specific transaction that's being audited. If I'm the regulators, prove to me how your company came to this conclusion with this event, with this. Why did you process this claim this way, and was it compliant?
Yeah, I think of compliance. I have friends that work in compliance, and I always like to think that they're the bad guys. But I know they're not. If anybody's in compliance, forgive me. But you're constantly looking for the problems, and it totally makes sense. And I want to be a good partner to them. I think the one thing that they offer up, and I don't want to reinvent anything, like from a compliance and oversight perspective, and that's the key word, is oversight and governance, really. Like, you can apply the same methodologies over the AI solution. It's just another person, really, right? Like, it's another person doing the work. And so I think as organizations try to get ready for it, I think it's just understanding, like, where is it being used? And the reason why I bring that up is, so funny, I looked at this question, I wasn't sure how to answer it, so I actually went to a generative AI platform to see what it would kind of help me. It didn't necessarily give me a good answer, but it gave me a resource, and I found that the Government Accountability Office did a study back in 2020, November of 2020, just on this topic. Like, if you read it, you're like, it just happened yesterday, but it was 4 years ago, right? Before even ChatGPT was on the scene. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the things they hit on is, like, we got to foster an environment of collaboration because this is all new, and we've got to be sharing the information. We have to be making sure the data is accessible, and accessible in the way that, Mark, you mentioned, which is, can I see inside the tool? And I think we've all heard stories about how these AI tools won't share the behind-the-scenes code that's kind of happening, to generate, because it can be proprietary. But it's going to be important that we're sharing that kind of information. That logic becomes part of the discoverable when you're kind of looking into the data. Sharing best practices across, areas, like what's working, what's not. And then education and then oversight clarity, which I hit on the governance piece of it. Just to kind of show you where the industry is going, the BCBSA just sent out kind of a notice. I don't know if are we the only blue? Are there any blues in here? Oh my gosh.
I think you might be the only one.
I feel like I'm
know your audience.
Yeah, I know. I've grown up in the blues. I've just done, I say the Blue Cross Blue Shield, but they just sent out to all of the association, like, hey, we have some specific criteria that we expect from you and to deliver to us by May of next year. And really what it is understanding your vendors and what they're doing. So Shashi, we're going to be asking you, what are you doing with AI? And that's part of the governance, right? Like, we have to start investigating because we're sharing the data. And now that you have it, what are you doing with it? And I gotta trust that you're doing, and you hit on some things. So I was like, okay, Shashi's good. Go over there. But I think that's part of the exercise that we have to go through, is not just what we are doing internally within an organization, but we're a very vended, industry, like so many vended solutions. So we have to rely on what other people are doing as well. And so the oversight kind of, it has no boundaries in the sense that we have to know where everything is happening. And I think oversight and governance is really just kind of the simplest approach to all those things.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's that boundaries word again. I think it's so important as you think about organizations that can support some of this work that, at a minimum, they can provide information about how their models work and, performance statistics to the extent that they're available. Maybe not exactly the secret sauce, but enough to provide some level of comfort and confidence that what's being done is the right thing, and that there's also still human oversight to ensure that you're getting the result you expect on an ongoing basis. Because as we know, these models can degrade over time, so you always want to make sure they're being monitored and updated to the extent that's needed. So I'm going to change topics a little bit. When we think about automation as an opportunity to reduce costs, improve efficiency, we're usually thinking about operations. But, what are some examples of how leveraging this type of technology can improve things like provider and member experience?
So I have.
Now
okay.
you can. I jumped the question ahead.
Yeah. This. We have a few different things we're working on at IBX. So me specifically, I have one, and then one is more of a corporate initiative. So I think a lot of people are probably doing stuff with agent assist. So that's one pretty simple approach. And I noticed in the automation AI and how it's helping experience, and I'll make that connection here, especially on the second one here, because I think I can argue almost anything would improve member experience, provider experience. So agent assist is the first one. You have all these disparate data sources. From a call center perspective, you have to go to medical policy, you got to go to the knowledge database for benefit information, and depending on how the group is set up, you may have to go to other resources too to kind of bring all that information together. So that's probably one of the easiest in the sense of like where can you actually apply this technology right off the bat. The one I really want to land on is kind of a pet project, and Mark kicked it off when he was still with us, and we have a detection tool or machine learning program that we helped build with a vendor. And it fits in the automation in the sense, if you think of analytics, and I'll go into the details of what we did. One of the analysts, we had this a forum. We have it called Voice of Provider, and we have a bunch of. It really feels like a geek squad. I mean, these young guys are just some real smart kids that are in there. I hate saying kids, but I know I'm old now. So, and they go through, and we kind of take information from the provider community, see what they're saying, and we try to actually go to the data. And one of them said, "Hey, I found something," and I was like, "Oh, that's so exciting! Show me what you found." So he showed me what we found, and he found an issue with adjustment rates for one of our groups. I said, "That's great." I go, "How did you do it?" I go, "Well, I clicked here, and I clicked here, and I clicked here, and I get here, and then I found it." I said, "Well, that's not scalable." I said, "It's great that you did that, but I go, we have to make the computer work harder." And I need to bring this group in because we developed a detection tool or model, which basically says we go across our claims data, and it goes through about 145 trillion permutations. I asked the team that helped me develop this to give me that number because I was like, it's got to be big because you're searching across so much information. If you think of a claim and all the dimensions of the claim that you're looking at, there's so many different things that can happen on that claim. How do you analyze all that information and find that needle in all that information where there's a provider issue or an adjudication issue? And so we start off with, I think it works out to 7 to 9 dimensions. That gets me to the 145 trillion permutations. And from that, it kicks out between 38 to 50,000 outlier events. And so those could be many different things. The easiest one for us to kind of hone in on for people to grasp the concept in is just claim denials. And so I take the claim denials, process it against other complementary metrics, and then I whittle that down to maybe a top 10, and I whittle that down to maybe 3, and I kick out a simple white paper with a case study that kind of gives it and presents it in a natural language process that somebody can then consume. There's many other steps that have to follow to make that effective, but imagine that, you took all that claim information you have, you try to go down, and the challenge you're going to run into is going to be, how do I whittle it down to a useful, actionable process, which is what we're working for. But it's the analytics that I'm after, is like, how do I automate finding things? And I think in terms of member and provider experience, the quicker I can get to finding those issues before I get a phone call, I think the biggest failure I can say is when I get a call before I found it, then I know we failed. So if I get a call before I found it, then I failed. And so that's always kind of my barometer for that. And it is really machine learning, algorithms behind the scenes. It fits into the AI. I did ask them natural language modeling to be presented because I wanted to be able to share it across the organization and make it consumable. People do not respond to the statistics, but they do respond to the stories, and that's what I try to build it to look like.
That's very true. Mark?
Yeah, just to make an observation here, you said something insightful. It would be wonderful if the technology, all of this, the application of generative AI towards automated agents is all great, but isn't the real goal to just eliminate the phone calls, like what you just said, within the data structures, eliminate the errors, find them before they happen so that the members are on the happy path, the providers are on the happy path. You think about, I talked about ecosystems and, all of the different data movement that happens within, back office, payer organizations. To get it all, to elevate everything, to get it all right at a point in time such that all the data is in sync, all of the data is accurate, to eliminate any of those errors, which are the reasons why members or providers call, is also probably where you're going to see the impact. So stated differently, if done effectively, it drives down the number of phone calls that are happening, which means members and providers, that, like, hey, net it out. You go to the doc, you want to deal with the doc, and that's it. You don't want a 52-page EOB and all these things. You just want it to work. And I think that's where the grunt work in the back office really will have the advantages of helping the members to not have those negative experiences.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. Imagine a world that's so intuitive that technology anticipates our needs and solves the problem before we have it. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So along those lines, talk a little bit about the future. What are some of the trends that you think could really change the game for us as it relates to automation and AI in healthcare?
You want to go?
No, go ahead.
Well, I feel like
we bring Dr. Castro.
Yeah, Dr. Castro. I think he stole any answers we could have given to this. So I'll actually give an example of like the future now. And actually, it was funny because he hit on it a little bit. I have a friend, so forgive me. I know I sit on operations, but I'm also an AHIP alum, and so I'm very much involved in the grander healthcare work stream. And I managed to sit behind a guy at one of the conferences, and he was talking about some technology or he was pitching his product to a friend of mine. And I told him a flaw in his plan, and then we had a good conversation. So he threw me on as an advisor to this company. I said, clearly I didn't do a good job because it's just kind of an unpaid thing, but I enjoy talking to him. But he has a company called SafeBeatRx, and what they do is he actually, Dr. GPT, he kind of hit on this earlier, where they do EKG monitoring, ECG, depending on how you want to use the terminology. And it monitors echocardiograms for high-risk medication. It's typically an inpatient setting usage, but now that you can use, and the reason why it's inpatient is the doctor has to monitor you, make sure you change the amount of medication that's being applied, and they'll keep you in the hospital. Well, now they've changed that paradigm and said, hey, you know what? This is all just like reading these graphs, and we can do an effective job of that. And better yet, I can send you home, and with without all the information that is usually attached to you, and I can do this where it's just connected to the doctor and his cell phone, so he can respond to those items. So that's simple in concept, but he took that one further, and he realized that in analyzing the data, they also could detect medication adherence, which I think is amazing, right? So think about that as like a happy accident as a reading just for the cardiovascular treatments. They could actually see when or when not you are not using your medication, and they can kind of say, hey, I can clearly see you're not using it, and then maybe we need to reassess, your treatment here. I guess the point of it is, in the future, is how do you move away from our traditional setting of healthcare, where we think that the big hospital in downtown Philly is really the proper place to receive care and treatment, and embrace the fact that, hey, information is flowing. I have a blood pressure monitor. I have one of those ear things for my kids, and Tidal Care is a great company out there that does some stuff with different diagnostic devices. So I think the future is really, changing the paradigm of how healthcare is delivered, and then from an operation perspective, creating less friction for the members so that things flow more smoothly as we interact with the new version of healthcare and how the payer has to kind of interact with them. So. The thought made more sense. I hope it made sense.
Well, I'll add to that to say, I think the journey or the future, the opportunities are going to be a whole lot of small bites at the apple. There's so many different processes and so many different areas that go on to make healthcare work. And for each of us to understand what's available and to refine and work on our own specialty is what will cause the sum of the parts to be greater than the whole type of thing. And I think that's where it hits, is like it's one step at a time. And there's so many different creative ideas of how to apply the technology, and it's a matter of getting them to that last mile of technology. As an operations guy, I always ask the question, how are we going to get this into production? Sounds great, but let's get it into production. So I would say all the creative ideas, they will continue to come, and it's like, how do you get value out of it? How do you put it into your productions?
Yeah, that's great. And I would just add to, the advancements in clinical decision support. I know most of this audience is operators, but I think we do have a couple folks from InnovAge in the audience. And I happen to know from my past life that InnovAge is using a pretty advanced technology in their pharmacy that's provided by another organization. And what this technology is doing, if you think about the explosion of pharmaceuticals and the various uses of pharmaceuticals, a little about InnovAge, they're one of the largest PACE organizations in the country, and PACE is Programs for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. It's an exploding population. They have diverse needs, and they're on a lot of different types of medications. And so this technology supports the pharmacist, and in some cases also the provider, through the use of machine learning algorithms to understand how to optimize medication regimen. So that's just another example of how this kind of technology, I think, is going to continue to support how we advance in the healthcare ecosystem overall. With that, I think we're going to conclude our discussion, but we are going to open it up for Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes. If anybody in the audience has questions for the panelists. Anybody have questions? I think we're going to send a mic around if you have them. If you want to put your hand up. Yes, one question. 1 second, we'll get you a mic. There you go.
All right, well, way louder than earlier. So the question I have is, we were mentioning earlier that processes is what the automation is going to replace, and that processors become validators instead. So they validate the process that the automation has done. Have you seen this validation in practice? And has this validation fed back into the automation and made it more efficient and more accurate?
Continuous improvement, love it.
Yeah, no, it is continuous improvement. I think I'll talk in general terms about places where I've worked without divulging too much, but yes, if you think about on the back end, just even the automated validation does require, what will tend to happen on the validation front, because, and this will be the natural progression, is first you will see your models have a lot of false positives, right? So you will need the experts who know how to look at that and read that, and many times that's going to be the same transaction processing teams that understand what to do in the system to do those validations. And that was my point about the transformation of the organization. So they're no longer doing the serial interface per se, but when you introduce the new technology, what you'll find is that it gives you everything and things you didn't know. And even think about your model where you got all these thousands of results and you have to distill it down to a competence level of what the automation can do. That's where I think I've seen examples of that type of transformation. So, and the furthermore of it is just because something's automated and in production doesn't mean you can let it ride because things are always changing. You think about, it's just too voluminous, but as you move through time, you do need to go back and inspect the work on some level. And I'm sure there's automation, there's automated validations, which is what we're talking about, but under the covers, everything, the business has to understand what the business outcome is producing. And that's where, my opinion is that's where you'll see a lot of the personnel migrate to. They'll transform from processor to analyst.
Stan, anything you'd add?
You described, I think, a classic machine learning process, which is you teach it and you give it feedback. And I think that in essence is the same thing. I'll stick to the analytics example. That's the continual process improvement on the model is what I'm after. And I'm nowhere near getting all the right answers and the right outputs, so I have plenty of room to grow in that regard. Ideally you get to a place where process has been automated and the validation is boring because it's so good, but I don't think we'll get to that because before you know it, a new president will be here and they'll change something, and some CMS director will come in and they'll change something. And so there's plenty of change that will keep things broken for us to keep having jobs.
Team members on the appropriate times to use AI and go out to what sources, and when do they need to not use it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I give IBX a lot of credit. They're pretty good about keeping things really tight and rolling out guardrails to make sure that we're using it appropriately. I think the Samsung incident was probably eye-opening for a lot of people and a really good reminder that these generative AI solutions are open, and if you read the fine print, they're actually their property once you put the question out into that world. And so we have an intranet solution which allows us to work within the confines of our information. There's small pockets of accessible information that we can use. It's very limited in scope. So when I say use it and adopt it, I'm using it in the confines of what the organization is running. I think the other day I brought up we were using the Google solution for Vertex, I think as it is, which is very cumbersome and kind of confusing to use, but you kind of force yourself to go in and learn some of this technology. Hallucinations, I didn't know that was a thing, and so I started testing it. It got all my answers wrong, so I became a skeptic because it didn't get the right procedure codes. It gave me prior authorizations on things that shouldn't have existed. Mm-hmm. So, I've definitely approached it very skeptically because, I've seen it hallucinate on me, even though it's accessing our own data, and I read it, and I was like, well, it's right. But you didn't get the right answer. So, but in terms of what IBX is doing, we're pretty well shielded in that regard, and I don't want to say we're impenetrable, but they do a pretty good job of keeping things controlled. And then we rolled out some learning CBTs for us to all go through and make sure that we understand what are you supposed to do, what can you use. Now the big thing is if you use Copilot during a meeting, you can't actually use it to take action. You can't use it to hold somebody accountable. You can only use it to kind of do summary. So there's a legal boundary as to how you can actually interact in the space too as well. And so I think we're still learning, but I think IBX is just taking a very conservative approach while still trying to use it.
great.
I'm looking at Carlos, make sure I answered that right.
Okay, other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you guys so much. It's been great.